The island of Hispaniola is one of the oldest islands in the Western Hemisphere. The island is very strategic because it has a lot of natural resources, it has a lot of precious metals, and a lot of the European powers were scrambling to get control of that area.
Haiti is the first place that Christopher Columbus did a fort, did a settlement. So it's the first settlement in the Americas.
Christopher Columbus on the west coast of Africa in 1482. He's involved with Africans on the west coast. That is how he came to America in the first place. It was they who told him there was land to the west. In fact, in his journals, he says that he met Africans going back to Africa when he was on his way to America.
What folks are doing these days shows that there were Africans on that island when Columbus got there. At least 3 different types. There were the Caracoles up in the north, Guanini, and there's another one. But you can find that in the book called The Annals of Haiti.
The Spanish declared this was for them. But the French says, what do you mean this is for you? And the British said, well, how could you have it all? So right from the beginning, we had colonial wars among them on the island.
When you're dealing with the Spaniards, you're looking at the introduction of Africans in 1503. When you're looking at the introduction of Africans from the French, you're looking at 1670. So you're looking at a wide gap between the Spaniards and the French bringing Africans onto this island. Well, what happened on that island was that they brought a culture that was deeply steeped in what is probably the most important liberating force that any human can have, and that is in spirituality.
1675, the Treaty of Ryswick, the church established that the island would be split in 2. One side would be for the Spaniards, and the other side would be for the French. So at that point, what the Spaniards had named the island, I told you, was already Haiti. That's the original name of the island. Now, the Spaniards named the island Hispaniola. And when they agreed to share it with French, the French called their side Saint-Domingue, and the Spaniards kept Hispaniola for theirs, but called the capital city Santo Domingo, which is still Saint-Domingue.
When the Spanish got here in 1492, and they're on the island from 1492 to 1625, the Spanish is looking for gold. They're looking for wealth, and this is the first thing they started doing. And they find some gold. Haiti still produces gold today. And so gold was the big prize that everybody's looking for. But once they get into sugarcane was sweet gold. I mean, sugarcane was it.
During the period where they were commencing this genocide against the indigenous population, a priest called Bartholomew de las Casas came up with this idea that it was ungodly to do what they were doing to the indigenous people of Hispaniola. They were killing them off. It was terrible, which it was, incredibly brutal. So they needed someone else to do it. And this was where he came up with the idea of getting people from elsewhere.
This revolution was going on from the moment Africans touched the shores. That's very important to understand, because what also happened is that when Africans were brought to this island, many of the warriors from the Congo, from Yoruba, or what we call Nigeria, or from Ghana, when they were brought here, the Ashanti, they immediately escaped and created maroon towns. These maroon towns would later become the actual hubs of the revolutions, because many of them never really experienced being enslaved. The great majority of sugar that was consumed in Europe came from that part of the world, came from that island. The coffee that went to Europe came from that island.
That colony that the Spanish founded, taken by the French, eventually became the most profitable colony in the Americas, and arguably, depending on which economist you consult, the most profitable colony in the world at the time. It became a centerpiece of the transatlantic slave system. It became what gave France its supremacy over Britain in the 18th century. I mean, this island, it's impossible to overstate the economic importance of the island in the period we're talking about. It produced more profit than all of North America combined.
This was a wealth that was largely borne by sugar, which was not only an item used to sweeten your tea and coffee, but it was also a marker of class. It was seen as a sign of sophistication when one used sugar. And in certain circles, it was even seen as a miracle drug of some sorts. And that helped to generate tremendous amounts of wealth on the island of Hispaniola, which is one of the reasons why the French, ultimately backed by the United States, fought so fiercely to retain that island.
I mean, the life expectancy in Jamaica or Haiti, for example, was often between 3 and 7 years. So once you arrived on the island, you were worked to death on average between 3 and 7 years. I mean, it's genocide. And so that was what contributed, the type of torture. Because the white population was so much smaller than, say, on mainland America, vis-a-vis the black population, the paranoia was worse. And therefore the types of punishment, the types of torture, the extremity of the slave regime was much more severe in the Caribbean.
Taking pregnant women, crucify them, split their belly open enough so they will have a game. People are gonna bet who's gonna die first, the baby or the mother.
The reason why there was more rebellions in Jamaica and in the Caribbean in general was a number of factors. One, conditions were much worse, and I don't say that in any way to denigrate or downplay how brutal conditions were in America, but we can see this from the fact that the slavery was so bad in the Caribbean that the populations were not even able to reproduce themselves. So constantly new populations had to be brought from Africa.
And one of the things they used to do is bury us alive on an anthill, leaving your head so that you would slowly get tortured to death by ants eating your skull.
First of all, let's be clear, the rebellions against slavery started in Africa. And the rebellions against slavery in Africa are probably the most under-discussed and underrepresented element of the whole history. Everyone tells you that Africans collaborated, which is true. What they don't tell you about is those Africans that rebelled. And in fact, scholars estimate now, and it has been studied thoroughly, that the rebellions in Africa alone, of which there were hundreds, prevented perhaps 1 million people from crossing the Atlantic.
And one of the ways the planters kept control of Haiti was either to rape or have a child with a black woman, and then send that child to Europe to be educated, and then bring them back, and they became the overseers.
But all Africans that were enslaved understood that their natural state of being human was to be free in Africa. Those two things always went together.
In the Caribbean, because there was a concentration of sugar plantations, which was the most brutal form of slavery, worse than cotton or indigo or coffee or tobacco, it was the most labor intensive. And also the number of Africans versus the number of Europeans was much higher in the Caribbean. And then you have, of course, terrain. So island like Jamaica, island like Haiti, very mountainous, lend themselves to guerrilla warfare. Then you have strange political coincidences. So like during the years preceding the Haitian Revolution, there was a civil war in Africa in the Congo. So a lot of the Africans, Congolese, that ended up being Maroons in Haiti were African war veterans. They were militarily trained personnel back in Africa.